North Korea didn't want it. And their sponsor at the Security Council among Permanent Five, back then the former Soviet Union until 1971, then also People's Republic of China joined. So both former Soviet Union and People's Republic of China supported the North Korean position not to allow South Korea to be admitted. And then with the Cold War ended in early 1990s, South Korea normalized relationship with Russia, then followed China. That opened the door for South Korea to be admitted because Russia and China made clear to North Korea, the then leader Kim Il-sung, that they will not veto South Korea's admission. Then North Korea decided to join the UN simultaneously. So two Koreas became the UN members same day in 1991. Then 30 years have passed. But before that, Korea has been there because with the UN, Korea has very special and long relationship.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that a little bit. What happened with inter-Korean relations in 1990, 1991? Did their jointly coming to the United Nations make a difference for inter-Korean ties?
Around that time, also inter-Korean talks have been held at the prime minister level. So two Koreas agreed on the document for the first time on basic relations between the two Koreas. But of course, two Koreas treat each other not as independent countries. So the document we agreed with the North Korea called the North, the South. Mm-hmm. But with regard to UN, we joined the UN as different member states. So it is quite special case because China always insists one China.
Right.
One China, two systems. So we also believe we are one Korea. But as far as the UN is concerned, we decided to join the UN as two different states.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see. To go back in history a little bit, as you say, there's a long history of UN involvement on the peninsula, dating back to the 3 UN missions between 1947 and 1950 that tried to keep Korea from dividing. And of course, there was a UN Unified Command that fought the Korean War. Then there's a long period of observership for South Korea at the UN. So starting from 1991, what difference has actual membership made for South Korea?
A big difference. Although, as you said, Korea has a very strong, special, long relationship with the UN even before South Korea became a member. Starting from our independence, then first UN monitored election, and then UN General Assembly recognized South Korea as the legitimate government on the Korean Peninsula, and then Korean War took place, and then Security Council for the first time authorized multinational forces to be sent under the name of UN Command. And then two Koreas competed at the UN, also at other international fora like non-aligned movement. Compete to get the support from as many UN member states on different resolutions both Koreas sponsor. But in 1975, paradoxically, two opposing resolutions were adopted by the UN General Assembly. And then South Korea decided it doesn't have any meaning to continue that type of diplomatic competition at the UN and multinational fora. And then we tried to persuade North Korea to join the UN together as full members, but we had to wait until 1991, and then it only was made possible only after South Korea normalized relations with Russia and China. But after South Korea became a full member of the UN, because South Korea was already a prepared member, because we have waited, we have participated in all meetings for over 4 decades at the UN. But the big difference is we didn't have the right to vote, and also we didn't have the right to be elected in any principal organ of the United Nations. So 5 years after our admission to the UN, we were elected as the member of the Security Council, which is the most important organ of the United Nations to decide on issues of peace and security, and also has the power to impose resolutions against the will of its member states if they feel it is necessary. So the 5 years after that, South Korea also produced the President of the General Assembly, which is also second most important organ of the UN. And then 5 years after, South Korea produced Secretary General, head of the UN Secretariat, again, another important principal organ of the United Nations. So within 15 years, South Korea achieved, we call it triple crown of the UN, because even today, more than 70 member states are not able to even sit to be elected as the member of the Security Council, let alone President of the General Assembly, because so far we have produced only around 75, and Secretary General only 9. So absolute majority of UN member states, which have been a member of the UN, couldn't achieve the triple crown Korea achieved within 15 years of our members. So it is really fast track triple crown, because we were prepared, because we followed almost every activity of the UN, even as an observer.
It's a great success story. I mean, clearly South Korea has had a great impact on the UN. What would you say about the UN membership's impact on South Korea? I'm thinking of South Korea's participation in 5 peacekeeping missions, among other activities. So what has South Korea learned from that level of engagement with the UN?
Yes, because we took our membership and also responsibility as a country which achieved triple crown in such a short period of time. It means responsibility for South Korea to be a responsible and respected member of the United Nations. So it means several things. First of all, as you said, sending as many peacekeepers as possible. Secondly, giving official development assistance to less developed members of the UN, because Korea rose from a aid recipient state to aid giving state, thanks to the assistance we have received from UN member states, particularly after the Korean War, because Korea was totally devastated after the war. But Korea rose again thanks to the aid we received from other member states. So we felt it's time to pay back the debt we received, but also we take it not just as a kind of paying back charity work, but also it means that we are making investment. At the international stage to earn the respect from other countries and also become a role model for less developed states so that they can also learn from us. Mm-hmm. So we try our best to teach less developed countries how to catch a fish rather than Korea giving them fishes every year. Mm-hmm. Because that's how we make ourselves enter a member of developed countries. So we try to give back what we received from the international community, and also by doing that, also it helped us to gain the respect from the international community, but also it is, I believe, good investment for Korea's image, particularly soft power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because South Korea is a great success story of how international assistance can be effective and successful, but also a lot of it is just the hard work of the South Korean people. It was not all about international aid. It was about how hard the South Koreans worked to develop. That's another model for countries. I'm not sure how many people know that President John Kennedy's vision for Peace Corps was that other countries who received American Peace Corps volunteers would go on to establish their own Peace Corps equivalents. South Korea is the only country that's done that, and so it's another example of South Korea contributing to the world. If I can make it more personal and turn to your own role at the UN, what were some of the challenges you faced as Undersecretary General and as High Representative for Disarmament?
I served the UN as a South Korean representative to the Security Council in mid-90s, when South Korea was first elected as the member of the Security Council. So I was lucky to sit and experience the Security Council conduct of business as the South Korean representative. And then 10 years later, the then foreign minister, my boss, decided to run for the Secretary General of the UN. And he asked me to run his campaign because I had experience of electing the late Secretary General Kofi Annan to the job in 1996. So somehow it helped. And also, I think because of Korea's grown international reputation, and also the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's also, I think, personal support base, we managed to get him elected as, at the end, unanimous candidate for the new Secretary Generalship. So with that, and then Secretary General asked me to move to the UN as his new sort of team for preparing the Secretary Generalship. So I went to UN ahead of him, and then I stayed throughout his 10-year tenure. So I served as Korean diplomat for 10 years, and then I moved to UN, served there as senior UN official for 10 years. The big departure for me is that the first thing I did when I took the UN senior position is that take the oath, I will now serve as international civil servant. Particularly, I will not receive any instruction from any country, including my own government. So then I realized on some of the issues, the UN Secretariat's position is not necessarily consistent with what South Korea has taken as national positions. So sometimes I had to lobby my own home government on the issues we believe South Korea should change its position. And then I felt not like South Korean diplomats who must defend South Korean national interest as international civil servant, meaning serving the member states, but also peoples around the world. It means that UN staff must be the voice of the voiceless, must be the defender of the defenseless in the world. So that is the job we must do, regardless of where we are from, what background do we have, and also what differences I may have in pursuing those positions with my home government. But it is a great sense of pride, and also a self-pride, and also achievement to be the voice of the voiceless. So trying to do our best to protect the marginalized people, vulnerable people, refugees, internally displaced persons, those at the forefront of conflicts or natural disasters. UN should be there. So it gives a lot of sense of personal reward and also self-pride to me. Even today, UN system is protecting over 80 million refugees around the world. And UN is feeding over 100 million people around the world every day. This is not weekly or monthly or quarterly number, but every day. So that much UN has to be there everywhere people need our support.
Yeah, I think there's a general impression among some members of the American public that the United Nations has not succeeded because there's not peace everywhere. That if there's conflict, it shows the UN has not done its job. I'm not sure they appreciate how much work the specialized agencies do. Very practical work that actually improves people's lives around the world. I think it's an excellent point you make. Can you talk about your time as a high rep for disarmament? What that involved?
Just before I comment on the disarmament job, I fully agree with your last point, because the UN has been criticized, but a lot of things, a lot of failures should be ascribed to member states, particularly big ones. On Syria, over 10 years, Security Council couldn't agree on anything. So the problem is division of most important member states. So many times we often joke at the UN that Secretary General, who is the boss of UN Secretary, International Civil Servant, also means scapegoat. SG. SG means Secretary General, but also scapegoat. It means if something goes wrong, I mean, UN Secretariat is bound to take the blame, because member states, they are hiding behind us. if something goes right, usually member states take the credit. But it is part of our job description. But that doesn't mean that if without UN, still I'm wondering how we can attend to the needs of those who desperately need in others' help in times of crisis, natural disasters. I mean, even the vaccination for on the COVID situation, vaccination for less affluent countries. Also, as you said, WHO as a specialized agency for health, despite the criticism against their effectiveness, but still, without WHO, vaccines for the least developed countries would be much harder to arrange if there is no COVAX international facility, for example. Now back to disarmament job. Again, when I first took over disarmament, some of my colleagues told me that you will take a thankless job. Because those who have the most powerful arms in their hands are not willing to get away with them unless they feel 100% secure about their security. But here we have a dilemma called security dilemma. The more arms you have for your own security, your adversaries will get more. So you will never be secure. But that's the nature of armament. So disarmament is the opposite we are trying to achieve. So I always felt like it's like riding bicycle uphill. So it means you have to keep pedaling. But if you stop or slow down, you will immediately collapse. But it will be very difficult to move higher and higher. But there's no other way but to keep pedaling with the hope we may see someday a little small peak. I mean, we had that moment when nuclear non-proliferation treaty was adopted in late 1960s. That helped to contain the number of nuclear weapon possessing countries to a single digit. President Kennedy once predicted within 10 years, the number would be more than a dozen in his time. But thanks to the NPT, we could limit the number to a single digit. Of course, it is not perfect because still we have a single digit number of nuclear weapon possessing states recognized and unrecognized. Likewise, at the peak of Cold War, Soviet Union and the United States and other nuclear weapon producing countries have more than 50,000 nuclear warheads deployed. But thanks to the New START and ABM treaties, that number went down to around 15,000. And it was going down, but recent trends are worrisome. But still, with disarmament architectures, we could manage the nuclear proliferation not to go too high. So it means that we cannot stop making an effort. Mm-hmm. But it will be very difficult to reach our ideal end point of zero nuclear weapon. Yeah, we may not get there, but still, we have to try.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think one of the success stories of 20th century diplomacy was non-proliferation treaty. You know, people don't appreciate things that didn't happen because they didn't happen. If it hadn't been for the NPT, we could have dozens of countries with nuclear weapons today. There's no reason why people couldn't acquire them. It's gotten fairly easy to do, but thanks to the NPT, it's a small number, and it's been kept small. And very few countries are trying to acquire nuclear weapons. I guess North Korea is the example to the contrary. And that kind of raises a question about North Korea. This year is also the 30th anniversary of North Korea joining the UN. We all know about the UN economic sanctions against North Korea, but is there another part that the UN can play in reducing tensions on the peninsula?
Yes, I mean, it is very contrasting to see two different trajectories. South and North Korea have traveled for the last 30 years after both Koreas were admitted to the UN as a full membership. South Korea rose from recipient of the international aid to the donor of international aid. And also Korea rose as 11th largest budget contributor and also peacekeeping contributor. But in big contrast, North Korea continue to slide down to we call it a basket case, meaning they need a lot of help, including humanitarian assistance. So UN has been providing the desperately needed humanitarian assistance for the most vulnerable North Korean people. And that has continued despite the political problems and sanctions imposed because of North Korean nuclear and missile development. So on political and security front, North Korea became the target of I believe, most severe and comprehensive sanctions. Because every time in response to North Korean nuclear or missile tests or launches, the Security Council decided new layer of sanctions. So as a result, North Korea is subject to most comprehensive and toughest sanctions in the UN history. But on humanitarian front, they are in dire need of humanitarian assistance by the international community. But the UN system has difficulty because of the donor fatigue. Mm-hmm. North Korean economic situation has worsened for the last 30 years. And because it collapsed, it coincided with the collapse of their economic system since the end of the Cold War. So that's the beginning of their bad times. So now they are suffering from, I think, a triple troubles. Self-imposed isolation due to COVID-19 pandemic, on top of economic sanctions you mentioned, and on top of the failures of their economic systems, starting from 1990s. So they are in a very difficult situation. They need more international assistance, but that international assistance becomes flat or not going up because of the donor fatigue. Because it has been there too long, and also because of the political problems created by North Koreans' own doing. So UN system has to pick up the bill to fill the gap, trying to provide really necessary minimum humanitarian assistance to the most vulnerable group of people in North Korea. But the level of assistance given to North Korea is very low. And if we look at the numbers, that it is even lower than most of African countries receive, for example. And sometimes some bad years when the international assistance was not forthcoming because of political and other problems, despite the fact that UN is always advocating that humanitarian assistance must be decoupled, must be separated from politics, because it is meant to protect the most vulnerable people. But if we calculate by the number of people UN has to provide humanitarian assistance with the amount of money, sometimes it is like $1 per child per week, not per day. So what the UN system can do? I mean, we cannot provide even food assistance. What the UN could do is to provide to those malnourished children as a sort of a powder form containing maybe 1,000 calories per day, so that they can drink it with water. Because children are malnourished, they can digest the food as we are eating every day, because their stomach can take it. So we have to convert it to a powder form so that they can drink with water. But it is not for their proper health or hygiene. It is just for their subsistence, their survival, until government can organize better food provision for them.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's so much a matter of donor fatigue as donor priorities, because there are so many places in the world that need help. And they look at North Korea, and here's a country that is spending a vast amount of money on weaponry that rather than helping its own people. I mean, the point is to help the North Korean people who are most in need. I agree with you. But for donors, they're looking around the world and they're trying to see who needs the help the most and who can use it the most. I think your third point about the economy being mismanaged is a very important point. If every sanction was lifted tomorrow, the North Korean economy would still be broken. North Korea needs UN specialized agency assistance in reforming its economy and improving its agriculture and improving its public health. You know, they desperately need assistance.
Absolutely. And also improve their not only economic, but also food production efficiency. Because, for example, their crop loss is huge. So if we help them to reduce even crop loss when they harvest their rice, for example, it can save a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of wastage.
They did a lot of help.
Yeah, I've seen that too. It kind of raises another question about the UN. Because the UN sanctions North Korea vigorously, it's interesting that North Korea decides to stay with the United Nations. I've never heard it talk about leaving. So what does North Korea get out of the UN membership?
I mean, first of all, humanitarian assistance. And also now they are interested, it is not just their economy, but also the forests, mountains, because they are suffering from very serious deforestation. So they need a lot of help on many fronts. Mm-hmm. And also they want to get the support to combat the consequences of climate change on them. Because of their mismanagement of mountain, forest, and other eco-resources, they are suffering a lot. Because if the same amount of rain pours on South Korea and North Korea, the damage is much greater in North Korea.
Mhm.
So they need help, and they know it. So that's why they were one of the first to sign and ratify, for example, Paris Climate Change Agreement.
Aha, yes, that's right.
So, of course, I mean, they never like sanctions, but there are a lot of things they know they need a UN system's help and advice and assistance.
Yeah, and could use South Korean help too. I've got to say, I've never quite understood why North Korea seems prepared to accept Chinese assistance when they have to, but they seem very reluctant to accept South Korean aid. Why is that?
Well, I mean, the bilateral aid between South and North Korea, sometimes they see it from political angle. When inter-Korean talks are held, then they think the South Korean, for example, food assistance and other assistance on, for example, in health areas will be forthcoming. So they tend to see bilateral assistance from political perspective. So what South Korea has done is to arrange aid through UN agencies, making it multilateral, but with making North Korea fully aware it is coming from South Korea. On that, they don't have any problem.
Okay.
But also, it works for South Korea because unlike South Korea dealing with North Korea on political and humanitarian fronts, UN system arranged a very robust monitoring mechanism with North Korea. So when UN system, for example, World Food Program or UNICEF or World Health Agency organization provides food aid, for example, then UN agency reserve the right to visit her home without prior notification and measure the circumference of the person. Because if you are malnourished, I mean, your hand will be more than enough.
Yeah.
So if we measure the circumference of your upper arm, then we know that whether food aid reaches those who in need. If not, then UN system cease to provide the aid. So UN has a very robust monitoring mechanism in place, which is not politically feasible when South Korea gives bilateral aid to North Korea, because North Korea will take it then as an insult or intrusion against their system.
Yeah,
So
I understand that. Yeah.
So I mean, it works for South Korea as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know donors also believe that it'd be easier to prioritize North Korea if they had more access to North Korea, so they could monitor what's happening there or needs assessments. But North Korea seems to be very secretive. It seems very difficult to.
But UN system has a very good needs assessment system as well, and also North Korea agree to do its census, population census, through UN Population Fund. Of course, funding they know also coming from South Korea and other Western countries. So that way, UN system has a lot to do with, in a way, easier for North Korea to accept, because also it provides the face-saving way out for them as well.
Mm-hmm. No, that's another great value for the system then. I know that my colleagues at UNESCAP, the United Nations Economic and Social Committee for Asia Pacific, have been impressed that North Korea actually provides what seems to be real data to UNSCAP on paved roads
Yes.
or air pollution. So
Mhm.
there is an engagement that's actually
Yes.
meaningful and seems
Yes.
to be honest.
Yes.
Let me, with the time we have, let me change the topic completely and ask two more questions of my own. First, I'd like to talk about South Korea's soft power. President Moon has appointed BTS as the special presidential envoy for future generations and culture, which is a great title. What would you say about the effectiveness of South Korean soft power in the world today?
Amazing. And it is much more than I expected because I had an opportunity to meet my friends, American, British from Europe, from Asia, all over Asia. It seems to me that all of them somehow know about BTS, for example. Because maybe I'm a too old generation, so but they know much more about BTS than me, not because of them, but because they're of their children.
Right.
Because their children somehow one day decide to learn Korean language because they want to follow what BTS sing in their sort of Korean song. Because so then their parents, my friends, of my generation, have no other choice to follow with them. And even they travel together to Korea to see their concerts here before COVID-19 hits us. But even before that, I mean, they came to, for example, London, Wembley Stadium, where Beatles gave St. Feet 5 decades ago. But the tickets were almost within minutes sold out, not just once, but twice in a row. So it was amazing to see how these sort of pop, so K-pop, soft power, but also I see now Korean movies like Parasite and even Minari this year, and also even Korean, particularly women golfers. So the movie, pop art, sports, and also so many areas, Korea's soft power, I think, is being projected to the world. And I think it's very powerful too. And I'm really proud of that. Because they are doing much more than trained diplomats like us, you and me, can do. So I absolutely agree with the president with the appointing BTS as a Korean ambassador.
Mm-hmm. Now, and part of the soft power too, I think, is showing South Korean values to the world too. The motion pictures, you mentioned Parasite, which deals with social difficulties and problems. You know, it shows self-criticism, democracy, honesty. You know, it's facing up to your own society's weaknesses, and finding ways to overcome them. It shows your energy and your determination to be better as a country.
Yes.
Other people learn a great deal from that. And it gives South Korea a lot of influence.
And also, one thing I'm particularly proud of is that somehow these very talented groups of Korean youth managed to combine the Korean characteristics with universal appeal. Mm. I think it is a very difficult combination. So I'm amazed by our young generation's ability to still keep Korean identities, some Korean characteristics, but make it universally appealing. Yeah, no, and I think that's great power. That's
That
a
is,
great
it's
hope
amazing
and
if you can
appeal.
do it. I guess for you and me, I guess our generation, an example would be the American Western, which was a
Yes,
huge phenomenon for a while, very
yes,
American, but seemed to have some universal appeal that people liked
yes,
American Westerns. And so
yes, yes.
you can do both at the same time.
Mhm.
Okay, my last question before I turn to the audience is about current news. President Moon is going to be coming to New York, and he'll actually be in New York, not virtually, but physically in New York.
Physically, yeah.
Yes, for the General Assembly. And so what do you think President Moon has on his mind for this visit?
I think he'll be one of the very few world leaders who will physically visit the UN, because still UN compound is not fully open, because staff are rotating, and also they are advising delegations to come to the UN venues with as little number of delegates as possible for the actual meeting. But still, despite all those things, Korean president decides to go to UN again, and also in his final year of his term shows that Korea's commitment, strong commitment to multilateralism.
Mhm.
Because Korea is a very good example which managed to rise from one of the least developed, because after the Korean War, we all know that Korea's per capita income is lower than most of even African countries. But now we rose to aid giving member of Advanced Countries Club. So it is a great achievement. And also Korea needs to show that we are willing and ready to share our experiences and help other countries to learn from our model, to follow it, to emulate it. And also even for Korea's future, from our enlightened self-interest, we also know that multilateralism should be the way forward. And that includes our hope that most powerful states of the UN, particularly US and China, somehow find a way to enhance elements of cooperation and reduce elements of competition and confrontation in their future relationship. So I hope South Korean president's visit to the UN will highlight Korea's enduring commitment. And also, we are very committed to contribute to global challenges, particularly including climate change, mitigation and adaptation action. We hosted the P4G summit in April this year, and also we joined the G7 summit, and also we will go to COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow, UK, later this year. So we will try to lead the world in our common fight against climate change, particularly in our end goal to achieve net carbon emission by 2050.
It's an ambitious goal, but a very important one.
Very important one.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you're seeing a renewed interest in the U.S. and multilateralism too, and a new commitment to it, which also opens a great avenue for conversation between Washington and Seoul about how we can cooperate in regard to multilateral institutions, regional groupings, third countries. So it enriches the U.S.-South Korea dialogue too.
Absolutely.
I think we have some audience questions, Doug, that have come in. Okay. Actually, we've been so interesting. I think the audience has been busy listening to you rather than thinking of questions to ask, which I take as a positive thing. So Then, if I can, are there any other comments you'd like to make yourself? You've got some time, or is there something you wanted to say but didn't get the chance to?
I mean, of course, the 30 years it sounds a long time for Korea, but somehow personally, I was involved from Korea's first membership of the Security Council, and then Secretary General's election. So somehow always I felt part and parcel of Korea's involvement in the UN. And that's why I'm very thankful to you, and also through you, KEI, your president, Kathy Stevens, as well, for choosing this topic for our conversation. But this means that I think Korea has a special responsibility to contribute more, because Korea is now seeking the third term of Security Council membership in 3 years. Mm. So it means that Korea will have to work for the issues of immediate interest to South Korea, but also we have to do more to represent the interest of Asia, because we are elected as the Asian member to the Security Council, but also as a country which rose from least developed to advanced country. Because recently UNCTAD, UN Conference on Trade and Development, decided to elevate South Korea to the developed country status, which was not done to any other country. So it is a great honor, but it means also great responsibility.
That's right.
So
no, it's easy for people to criticize the UN from the outside, and it has had some failures as well as successes. But I can't think of any problem that would be easier to solve if the UN wasn't there.
Absolutely.
So I think it serves both the United States and South Korea's interests very well.
Absolutely. So also even today, despite all the criticism we have on the failure in Syria and other places where Security Council couldn't agree on. But despite all those failures, still, as you said, I cannot foresee any other way how we can feed over 100 million people, how we can protect over 80 million and still rising refugees. Because no single country or any entity, no matter how powerful, resourceful they are, they cannot do it by themselves. They cannot do it alone.
Yeah, and the problems we're facing are global problems: pandemic, climate change, dealing with globalization, migrations of peoples. These are all international problems. So
yes,
the United Nations actually has a role to play. I see we've got a few minutes left, but a question did come in, if I can put it to you. The question is, what is the United Nations role in promoting human rights in North Korea?
As the UN official, I visited North Korea twice. I visited North Korea around 6 times as South Korean diplomat representing foreign ministry at the inter-Korean talks. But also I visited North Korea twice. And also I always engage with North Korean ambassador and North Korean diplomacy in New York, because the North Korean mission in New York invited me because I was a UN staff. I was not a South Korean diplomat. So they didn't invite, even when they didn't invite South Korean diplomats or ambassadors to their reception, they invited me. So I engaged with them on multiple fronts, because as an international civil servant, also it is my responsibility to engage member states, all member states. And on human rights issues, we had an opening because UN Human Rights Council deals with human rights issues universally. So they introduced a system called Universal Periodic Review, which means every member state has to go through periodic review, maybe 5, 7, 8 years interval, but all member states have to go through same periodic review on their human rights record. So even the civil society activities also came to that review process, which was done UN Human Rights Council, and they came up with a number of recommendations. So it is extremely political to raise human rights issues with North Korea, but UN had an opening because North Korea came to the Universal Periodic Review, and also they received the recommendations as a result of that periodic review. So UN could ask them to carefully review all the recommendations and take necessary measures. So they couldn't refuse to talk about human rights issues because we had a very good opening, politically safe opening. And of course, UN cannot stop defending the defenseless and becoming the voice of the voiceless. So human rights issues are the universal issues we have to raise with all member states. And that way, we could manage, discuss human rights issues when we engage with the North Korean delegates.
Yeah, the fact North Korea engages with the process shows they take it seriously. So that's certainly positive.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope so.
Okay. With that, I think our time is winding to a close. So let me thank you, Ambassador Kim, for a very interesting and encouraging presentation. We appreciate it very much. I'd like to thank the audience for watching. Let me mention a couple of upcoming KEI events. On September 23rd, at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, we're going to have a conversation on South Korea-Japan security cooperation in Maryland. And then on September 30th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, we'll be discussing South Korea-China relations with Dr. Chung Jae-ho from Seoul National University. So I hope you'll join us for those events. You can also see more of our activities and research and commentary at our website at keia.org. Okay, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. And also please convey my greetings to Kathy, and also look forward to your continuing events in the future.
We'll stay in touch.
Thank you so much.